Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to have you join us today. We're going to be waiting for a few other friends to join us, so just sit back, hang tight, and we'll start the program very soon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I see so many people joining in. The numbers are rising there in the participants list. So we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us today. We're so excited to be focusing on today's session, Reflections on Learning and Examining Leadership Structures. My name is Arlie Ziskind, and I'm a member of the admissions team for Schwarzman Scholars, and I've been with the program since 2017. So if you are new to Schwarzman Scholars, you know nothing about the program, and you're wanting to learn more, I encourage you to watch any of our pre-recorded information sessions or our live general information sessions, which are being held now until the deadline in September. And then, of course, for those of you who are joining us today, this is really a great opportunity to learn how the Schwarzman Scholars Program facilitates the development of our scholarships, of our scholars' leadership acumen. And we'll get to hear from our alumnus on their experience and their capstone project specifically. So this capstone project is a year-end project. It's really the culmination of your experience as a Schwarzman Scholar, and so that will be the focus in today's session. So with that, I will turn things over to my colleagues, Alicia and Sheila, to introduce themselves, and to our alumnus. Sheila, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Great to have so many of you participating today. My name is Sheila Kroll. I am the Senior Academic Officer for Schwarzman Scholars, and I have been with the program since fall of 2018.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Pan, and I'm a Selection and Outreach Officer, also part of the admissions team. I've been here since, I guess, September 2019. Time really flies. I'm so excited to connect with you all, and hope that you'll consider joining us for the 7th cohort. Dunola, I'll ask that you introduce yourself right now.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. My name's Dunola, and I was in the 4th cohort, so I graduated last year. And now I work at the ITU, which is the United Nations agency for tech and ICTs, and I'm really excited to share more of my experience with you all today. Hope everyone's doing well. Over to you all. So
thank you, Dunola, so much. So before I turn things over to Sheila to introduce and provide an overview of our curriculum and the details of the Capstone Project, just a few housekeeping items. We will hear from Sheila, and then we'll moderate a conversation with Dunola and asking her questions. So if you all have any questions during today's session, we ask that you direct those to the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to get to those when we dive into the conversation with our alumna. So with that, Sheila, over to you.
Thanks, Arlie. So I'm going to be going over a brief overview of the academic components of a year as a Schwarzman Scholar. So all students will complete a master's degree in global affairs during their year in residence. Scholars take coursework focused within our 3 pillars of China, global affairs, and leadership. So all students will take a core course focused on China's political, economic, and social reform over the last 40 years. They'll also take a core course on global affairs. And for leadership, students can choose between sector-based core courses, including courses like leadership in business and leadership in diplomacy and security, and also from courses taught by leading practitioners, including the former medical director of Doctors Without Borders, Uni Karunakara, and the former UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs and Undersecretary General for Management, Angela Kane. To complete their degree, scholars will take 28 credits over the year. That includes 10 credits from the core coursework, 8 credits of electives, many of which are focused on China's role in the world. And the remaining 10 credits will come from orientation, Chinese language courses, co-curricular experiential learning, including the deep dive, and their required Capstone Project, which I will delve into in more detail in just a moment. Our courses are taught by leading faculty from Tsinghua University and top international universities. And for any applicants who are interested, you're welcome to check out our website for a comprehensive overview of the curriculum and also a full list of courses that are currently being offered at Schwarzman College. So shifting gears just a bit for the Capstone Project. The Capstone is a comprehensive presentation of each scholar's classroom-based and experiential learning over their year at Schwarzman College. Scholars are encouraged to draw upon both the deep dive and their coursework to choose a topic and develop their capstone project. We recommend that scholars focus on global issues and also address their topic's relevance to or connection to China. And students can work either individually on their capstone project or on a group capstone. For the group capstone, students would work in a team of 3 to 5 students focused on applying practical and research-based solutions towards a specific issue area. In the past, our group capstones have worked with partner organizations, including the Center for China and Globalization, VIP KID, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The capstone project can take 3 forms. It can either be a case study, a policy analysis, or a research paper. Students will work closely with a capstone faculty advisor, which are drawn from our colleges and Tsinghua's faculty and are mutually selected by the students and their advisors. And finally, for the capstone project, students submit a paper and also participate in an oral presentation in the spring of their year in residence. So that's a brief overview of the academic components, and I'll turn it back to Arlie.
Thank you, Sheila. And as I mentioned before, this is a great opportunity to learn more about the Capstone Project. But if you are looking for more information, we have so many resources available for you online, or an opportunity to join one of our live general information sessions to learn more before the deadline. So with that, I will ask Alicia to share with you all a slide that includes both Anushka and Dinola's Capstone Project titles. And I will invite Anushka and Dinola to join us via video again. And we look forward to the conversation with the two of you on learning more about your capstone project and how you approach that year-end thesis. So with that, I'll turn things over to Alicia to start the conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. And we're also so pleased to have Anushka be able to join us. Anushka, why don't you very quickly introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about your class year, what you're currently doing, and where you're based.
Sure. Yeah. Apologies for that. I was having some trouble with Zoom. Thank you so much for hosting this. And I'm really excited to share, more about my capstone and my time in China. It was probably the most life-changing experience I've ever had. So I'm currently an MBA, sort of dual degree MBA, Master's in Education at the Wharton School. And before this, I had started a foundation that focuses on exchange between China and India. And we were focused on education policy, and eventually we're launching a business unit. This was my sort of plan post Schwartzman, but so currently I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Sure, fantastic. And then for both of you, why don't we talk a little bit, maybe you share more about perhaps your academic and also kind of life trajectory that made you even consider Schwarzman, and how that kind of fit into your leadership narrative and why you wanted to pursue academics after your undergraduate experience. Why don't we start off with Anushka, because you're still unmuted.
I know, yeah. So, I think when I have been interested in education since I was in high school. I consider a pretty not great experience. And when I came to the US for undergrad, I sort of kept wondering, like, what is making my experience here so good, and why did I really disliked my education when I was, back home in India. And so I actually did my senior thesis at NYU, also on education and the sort of impact of education and labor mobility for sort of marginalized communities. Post NYU, I worked in the financial services industry for a while, but I was sort of always thinking about education, and I heard about this new liberal arts university being founded in India, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be sort of, if this does well, it's a risk, but if it does well, this could be a game-changing institution for the country, because we don't have critical thinking-based education. We don't have, sort of the ability to pick whatever you want to study for a little while and explore yourself. Most people have to pick their stream pretty much up front. So I sort of left New York, I moved back home, and I was a part of helping start this institution, and we're now a full-fledged research university. But I think while I was there, I stumbled upon a number of Chinese education policies. I was working on a policy for the Indian Education Ministry, and I suddenly realized like China had done so much work over the last 30 years on building a really strong research university ecosystem. And I think, I think the reason that we're seeing so much stress in the US-China relation today is partly at the root cause of it is because China has invested so much in STEM research, right? And it's sort of, we're seeing a tech Cold War, and that tech Cold War stems from the ability to China to actually be a competitor to the US today. So all of this comes back down to education. And so that's when I found out about the Schwartzman program, and I was like, oh my God, I have to go there. I have to learn about this place. I have to understand how they've achieved all the things that they've achieved. And that's how I ended up at the Schwarzman Scholars. And and I continued exploring education there as well. So.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. And Dunola, why don't you share a little bit about your academic trajectory that led you to Schwarzman College in Beijing?
Yes, of course. Thanks for the question, Alicia. So essentially, my undergrad was in economics. So my background was in finance, economics, maths. And after graduating, I started working in investment banking. So I was working in FX sales and trading ops. So basically, I was like at Morgan Stanley, then I was at Goldman Sachs. So very much an sort of investment banking finance path. However, I've always been kind of, not so really secretly, but secretly super interested in international development. So on the side, I started sort of writing papers and applying for things like and getting to represent the UK in things like the Youth G7 Summit. I was selected as UK delegate for I think Girls 20 Summit in 2017, which is an affiliate of the G20 Summit, but with focus specifically on the economic empowerment of women and girls. And going to that conference in Munich basically just kind of like, because I've always been interested in gender equality, but that to me, getting to meet young leaders, activists, people with lived experiences from all over the world that were all passionate about the economic empowerment of women and girls just really kind of propelled me. And I learned so much about so many different contexts and just meeting new people that when I came back home to the UK, I started my charity called Luton Light. So I'm from Luton in the UK, which is like a small town near London. Where I my charity basically focuses on the economic empowerment of women and girls through workshops, trips, different things like that, basically just to really promote the representation as well as mentorship as well as sort of encouragement of young girls to pursue historically male-dominated career paths. So I've always been interested in this. So I had like this job that was very much structured and nothing really to do with politics, but sort of on the side, I was so interested and passionate about everything else that I was doing around international development, especially around the empowerment of marginalized groups. So for me, when I found out about Schwartzman, when I read about it and I, decided to apply, it was because when I quit my job to kind of go to China and to do it was because I was getting to a point where I wanted to pursue a career in what I was really passionate about. So I all the stuff I was doing on the side, I wanted that to be like my main thing, basically. And to me, the opportunity to go to a completely new environment, I knew no Mandarin, never been to China before, didn't know anyone in China. but I just thought this chance to study global affairs, I know I'm passionate about, international politics, but I've never studied it. So this chance to just kind of meet amazing people from all over the world in a completely new environment, opportunity to even learn the language, and then also like test the things that I think, right? Like test why I want to have this massive career pivot and meet new people and explore new opportunities. And that was what drove me. And while I was in China, which we'll get a chance to talk about more, I really did explore, and I really did. So I joined the steering committee for the Schwarzman Women's Conference, and then I started working with the British Embassy in Beijing on their digital and inclusion policy. So I started to do things basically that was leading up to my capstone, which ended up being, again, an exploratory study of female leaders in China. And I got to interview amazing female leaders in China, and really got to kind of tell their stories in my capstone, which, yeah, even I just read it to prepare for this, and it gave me like goosebumps again and inspiration all over again, because it was really a great experience to speak with them.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tsinghua. And very quickly, for both of you, do you mind just mentioning 2 observations, just very rapid fire, of what your Schwarzman College academic experience, or even at Tsinghua, was like, and how that was different from your undergraduate studies? Like what were some highlights, big impressive takeaways that you gained from that? Anushka, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. So I was very focused on what I wanted to learn. I took all the classes that were focused on China, and there were classes that were not sort of China focused, right? Like you could do LATAM business and things like that. And so for me, I felt like I got a chance to go relatively deep into the Chinese economy and the history of the Chinese economy, the Chinese social reform system and Chinese education, the Chinese sort of political structure. And so I feel like I came away, I mean, the difference, I guess, really was that like I tried to get like a holistic view of how sort of a very, very complex nation works. And what I think that has given me really is like a baseline or a foundation for like, as I keep trying to understand China, I have this like baseline knowledge of the most important factors of this place, so that I can keep going deeper and like understanding things that I would never have really understood before, right? And I honestly think that one of the things that most people are missing in any sort of goal of understanding is everything is a system. And so, if you want to understand the Chinese economy, you have to understand the Chinese political system. You have to understand the Chinese sort of social reform system and how people think and the culture. And so I think that that's a really important part of, any sort of international engagement. And I feel like that's what I got at Schwartzman.
Great, Tsinghua.
Sorry, I'm not sure how I got muted, but for me, I think the academic experience that was more than just studying was like the main thing for me. So the fact that the academic experience included, deep dives, getting to travel to different places, meeting people, really practical work. Like there was this one course that was taught by Angela Kane, who used to be like, I think, an Under Secretary General of the UN. And the course really was just her, so things that we read about in the news, like she could just say, like, it wasn't like, oh, read this textbook on page this and you can find out what to do if this were to happen. It was like, this happened and I was there and I had to make the call, and this is why I did what I did. And so for me, that was a way more I don't know the word that I'm looking for here, but just a way more real learning experience, right? It was just beyond theory in a way that I hadn't experienced before. So that's why even now once I think about and now I never knew I would end up working at the UN, but when I think about that, and at that point I had no idea that would be like my next job when I left. But when I think about that course, I think about real things, not just if this were to happen, this is what you should do. Very much like, this is what happened, these are the decisions people took, what do you think about that? So that rigorous thing about, what do you think, how do you perceive this, not saying this is right, not saying this is wrong, not saying we should do this or do that. it just really makes you think about things in a way that's very real when you're speaking to somebody who was there, who basically had the experience. I think for me, it was just a heightened intellectual experience that I really valued, right? And the second thing that I would say is, I think maybe coming from a British university, and not knocking it at all, but it's just not, well, in my specific situation, maybe it's different at other schools, not the norm to always kind of put your hand up and say things. You just kind of sit there, take your notes and go home kind of thing. And if you've got a question, you can email someone. But then, so it was very different for me to be in a place where everyone's genuinely encouraged, and like, it's a good thing to kind of put your hand up and talk. So it took me a while to get used to that, especially because I think some of the points for the course, I think like a specific amount includes your class participation. So I was thinking like, oh my gosh, like it's not just that they encourage you to say it, like you should to do well. So it really brought me out of my shell. There's some things I would never put my hand up and say in a class, especially when I think everyone's so amazing and so great. Like, what am I, like, what am I about to say when I have no academic background in politics? But that really forced me to come out of my shell and to test some of my theories as well. And then that just, as I was saying earlier, made for a more enriching academic experience. So those were the other two things I would raise.
Thank you, Danola and Anushka. I mean, it's so wonderful to hear why you decided to pursue Schwarzman Scholars and what the big takeaways were from the program. And I think it ties in so perfectly to how the program really facilitates the development of our scholars, really the scholars' leadership acumen. And so, and Danola, you just mentioned this too, it's really about the lived experiences, and that's what really provided you the support and the development that you needed to grow as a Schwarzman Scholar. So I want to go now to the Capstone Projects, which is really the focus of today's conversation. So Danola and Anushka, it was up on the slide just a minute ago, but if you could just introduce your Capstone Project and how you approach, well, how you decided to focus on that particular subject and how you approached your research, that would be great. Anushka, we'll start off with you.
Sure, yeah. So I think, as I mentioned, I was a part of helping set up one of India's first liberal arts universities. And I think for me, liberal arts education is so sort of connected to education in general. I think is connected to, we sometimes think of it as disconnected from the political economy of a country, but it is very much connected. It is how you want your citizens to be shaped, right? And liberal arts is sort of very much rooted in the democratic tradition. It's about active citizenship. It's about asking questions. It's about being a sort of like having civic responsibility and, thinking about those things. And so for me, the question was, what are these two countries, trying to get out of this kind of education system? And who are the main actors who are promoting this and why? And so that's kind of the sort of where I came from in terms of questioning, because I heard about a lot of sort of small liberal arts colleges being started across sort of China's large universities. So Peking University has one, Tsinghua University, of course, has one. There are a number of smaller ones across China. China has at least 50 at this point. And so that was the main question. Like, why are they doing this? Do they want active citizenship? Do they want more critical thinking in their education system? In terms of the approach, in all honesty, I was like, I'm not sure how to do this. This is like, firstly, I didn't speak Mandarin when I went there. But Dean Wong, who was the dean of Schwarzman College at that time, was honestly so helpful. He was very encouraging. He opened his Rolodex up to me. He, would reach out to people so that I could interview them. He made phone calls in front of me in his office to reach out to people. And, he really went out of his way to help me get interviews to get me started. And I think one of the most helpful interviews that I got was with Dean Ganyang, who is the dean of Tsinghua University Liberal Arts School, Shinya College. And I think Dean Ganyang sort of really helped me shape how to approach this. So, what is sort of the baseline research that I would need to do, but also what are the sort of questions that I should be thinking about. But I honestly think the key to a capstone really is you could have a fundamental question that you're really curious about, but like, I think Danola said this too, it's like really talking to people and getting those interviews and learning from them, and their perspectives will be different. Like I spoke to Dean Ganyang, and then I spoke to Deputy Dean Sao Li from Shinya College, and then I spoke to other people at Tsinghua University's education school, and there were pretty differing viewpoints. And I think even just hearing the internal debates that Tsinghua University is a massive institution, right? President Xi Jinping went there. So many eminent people have come out of there. Hearing the internal debates of how this sort of massive institution in China thinks about change, thinks about starting a liberal arts college from the people who were there doing it. Those are the kinds of things that I think you would never get if you didn't do Schwartzman. How would I get to learn about the sort of internal politics of how this liberal arts college was started? How would I understand what the sort of mindset was in terms of thinking about why they needed this education? So yeah, I think that was really, it was fascinating, and I felt like I learned so much more about inherent political mindsets, and I felt like I got a much deeper sense of almost like Chinese education culture, which is a strange thing to say, but anyways, yeah, that was sort of my experience.
And I think something that you just touched on is really the epitome of Schwarzman Scholars, understanding these very different viewpoints or perspectives. You got a sense of that in your capstone project, but that's really the epitome of Schwarzman Scholars, is not only to deepen your understanding of China, but to gain this global perspective through the different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences of your cohort. Who all come from different lived experiences and can provide sort of their intake or perspective on a particular issue or a class or some sort of different experience. So that really resonates with me. Danola, I'll turn things over to you to provide sort of an overview of your capstone project. And I know you'll be pretty strong on this, given that you just read your capstone project just the other night. So I know you're prepared for this.
So yes, I really enjoyed writing my capstone because, as I was saying earlier, I have been really passionate about gender equality for a long time, and I've been trying to work in the space on a local level through my charity, on a national level through some boards that I'm on in the UK, and then on an international level through the Girls 20 Summit, and going to and then after that the Women Political Leadership Forum, I think in Lithuania, I did like in 2018. So I was getting to represent the UK in all these different conferences and learning more and building this knowledge, and just so passionate about it. But it wasn't what my day job, it was just something on the side. So this for me was like my chance to sort of bring all this interest and this passion and this conviction that I had to a completely new environment and learn, and then just kind of enjoyed the process. So I wanted to talk about female leadership. I knew that from the beginning. And from, I think it was the first week we were in Beijing, when there was like a kind of ceremony, I think an opening ceremony at Tsinghua, and then all the senior leaders of the universities sort of walk forwards. And, it was very beautiful, it was very great. But out of them, I did not see many women. And to me, I was like, I want to know why. And then at the very end, this one lady just like steps up, and I'm like who is she? I want to know her story. And I just thought, wow, I want, like, for the women who are leading in China, I want to just know about them and find out, what they're interested in, how they got there, their perspective on what we would say gender equality is. And by we, I just mean from a Western perspective, having, grown up in the UK personally. So that was, so from the first week, I kind of just had it ticking, but I didn't have any question in mind, right? So when I started to attend more events, so actually one of the women that I interviewed was a mentor. We had in the mentor mixer, we had a mixer where we could meet our mentors that we were given. And just speaking to people, especially people who had moved to China from different countries and were entrepreneurs, and just wanting to find out how they found that, how they went about it, right? So I just started to keep note of these people, keep their cards, just thinking I might interview them, for my capstone one day or something. And then COVID-19 hits. And so then I find myself back home in Luton, because I was thinking, I didn't even think about the fact that of course there'll be the language barrier. I just thought I have one of my friends or someone come with me to interpret when it comes to interviewing, right? But then of course when you're at home in Luton on Zoom, it's very difficult. So then that actually changed what my initial question was going to be and the amount of pool that I had, because now I had to then select people who I know would not mind a long interview over Zoom speaking just English. So a lot of things had to change, but the key questions I was asking were things like, what does women, the term women empowerment mean to you? How connected do you feel to the Me Too movement and like the general global feminism movement? Do you think being a female has hindered your career in any way? Have you ever had a female boss? Have you ever been a mentee? Have you been a mentor? Do you see yourself as a role model? So just so many questions. And one of the key, most amazing things that happened, especially when I was trying to find people last minute, because of the pandemic situation, was actually I ended up interviewing a lot of staff from Tsinghua I had met, and they did not mind the time difference to spend this time with me to discuss very in some cases personal issues, and then to make up the numbers, but also great, interview some of my wonderful Chinese scholar classmates. And then it ended up being a comparison between sort of young women leaders and sort of more established leaders. And then I sort of did another comparison as well between those who grew up in China and those who moved to China, and just exploring what leadership even meant to them, how they define it. It was so interesting. And it was an exploratory study, because I wasn't saying now this is the representation of all female leaders in China. No, it's more like just these 10 amazing women that I met, this is what they said, and this is what I think it may point to, which is why it was an exploratory study. It's something that's meant to trigger or inspire people to study more or explore more. So more than a research thesis, it was more like just, here is what I found out when I had 45 minutes to an hour conversation with 10 amazing women in China. This is what they said. And there were some really funny parts, there were some really entertaining parts, some really inspiring parts, some really difficult parts where I knew that there had been some real tension in some areas, and just really that grit and that fight, which I think is universal. I think anyone who's been able to achieve something can say, this is the journey, and I got to experience that and speak to them and have a deeper sort of connection with them after that. So I really enjoyed the process, and I had to dedicate the capstone to them after, because they're the stars, and I just hope their voices came through, because most of it was literally quotes from them. I wanted their voices to be amplified in my writing.
That's fantastic, and your enthusiasm is just infectious, and so from everyone who's listening in right now, you clearly see two very unique examples of how scholars are able to really create their own, I always mention that Schwarzman Scholars, it's a very bespoke experience. You can tailor it to really meet your needs, and you can pursue your interests. And so from what it sounds like, Dunola's capstone is more specifically, it sounds like an oral narrative, a collection of stories, and synthesizing and observing those different perspectives. Whereas Anushka's is going to be a little bit more on like that education policy and that analysis of structures. And so Sheila, do you mind sharing a little bit more about the different types of capstones that scholars may pursue, and also the support services? It sounds like too, already you've heard time and time again, Anushka and Dunola talk about how they were turning towards their professors and their mentors to really help them open up their network in terms of getting source material for their capstone projects.
Sure. So for the capstone, there are really 3 different avenues that you can choose from in terms of presenting this material. You can either do a more traditional research paper, which might be a bit more similar to the traditional master's thesis. You could do a case study where you focus on one particular issue area or event or company in more detail, or you could also do a policy analysis in which it's a bit more government focused and you're looking at specific policies over time. So there is flexibility within the particular format that you choose to take. And I think that is also something, to Alicia's point, that you can talk in more detail with your capstone advisor about. They will give you plenty of support and advice on which particular format that you want to take for your project. And then in terms of additional support, so you do have a capstone advisor. You can also work with different faculty across Schwarzman College to ask for feedback, recommendations, advice. We have postdoctoral teaching fellows who are in residence with us over the year who you can tap on for support or research advice. And so there's a lot of different support mechanisms in place, as well as different formats that you can take for that project.
Fantastic. That's great. And so very quickly, Dunola and Anushka, I'd also like to ask, and for all of those in attendance too, Schwarzman Scholars is a 1-year master's degree program. So time really flies when you are a part of Schwarzman and you are at Schwarzman College. And so just wondering too, and I'm asking for both Anushka and Dunola, how did you kind of leverage or flex your academic schedule? How did you, how did you frame it and manage with the academics? Dunola, why don't you go first?
So for me, so I know, of course, everyone's got a different story. Like some people wanted to do, side jobs or internships or, this sort of thing. So of course, it depends on everyone's individual situation. But for me, I wanted to structure my selection of courses just based on things I found super interesting, not based, because if I wanted things to be kind of easy, I would have just chosen like some of the finance courses, because I would have been like, I've done like economics, so this would be fine, but I didn't want that. I wanted things that would challenge me and things that would be so interesting and things I would just never choose in a million years. For me, it was an experimental year. Like I just want to just learn. I just want to just see what's out there and really push myself. So it just worked out that I had more courses sort of mid-year. So in the very beginning, my schedule wasn't super packed, and that was when I had the opportunity to then do the work I was doing with the British Embassy in Beijing. So in terms of my capstone, because from that first week when I just saw the sort of my inspiration at the opening ceremony, it was just in my mind the whole time. But there was another course called Research Methods, which is a non-credit course, which I recommend to anyone who did not write a dissertation in undergrad. So I didn't write, so this is the longest piece of writing my capstone I've ever done in my whole life. And before that, there was nothing even close. So I chose not to do a dissertation in my undergrad because I wanted to do just more exams. I'm a very sort of maths person. So once I knew that I'm going to have to write this, capstone, I thought I need to brush up on my writing skills and actually prepare. So I chose this research methods course, which was so helpful. If you're someone who is not a big writer, just do it, just take it and thank me later, right? And the piece of work you have to submit at the end of that, sort of by Christmas time, is literally your concept note for your capstone. So it forces you at the beginning to start thinking about what you want to write about. So the fact that even though COVID hit and I found myself in a different part of the world, I didn't have to start from scratch because I had already written this concept note. So at that point, what I had to do was adapt it to my new situation. That, okay, you're not going to interview 50 people, it's going to just be 10. Okay, it's not good, it won't be here. It would have to be people based in Beijing and some people you've already met and people who don't need like a translation with you. So then it was easy to just adapt. So in terms of timings and so on, if you're someone who just, you know, that didn't study like a course like a law where you had to write loads and loads and loads, I would 100% recommend taking research methods, or just timing yourself, in knowing in mind that if you're not that person that can just churn out an essay overnight, and like me, you need some time, I would just say from the beginning, start to think about it, and start to you know, just set aside some time to really put something together, so it's not like a big rush at the end. Yeah, so you can enjoy the process, and it's not, you know, stressful in any way.
Anushka, what are your thoughts and observations?
So it's been a couple of years, because I was class of 2018. So this was 2017, 2018. So from what I remember, I basically, I have done a lot of writing prior to Schwartzman. And so I was pretty comfortable with writing a capstone. But I do think like it takes a lot. I mean, it takes a lot of time. And what I ended up doing was I ended up front loading a lot of my classes. So I took a lot more credits, you know, in my first sort of first semester, so to speak. So the first 6 months, leaving my sort of last part of Schwartzman for other things like our, you know, I was also working at VIP Kid. And so, you know, wanting to do that and work on the capstone. And so I remember sitting in one of the like 4th floor lounges for just like, this is terrible. I took over a whole lounge. Basically, anytime anyone walked through that lounge, they would just see me there with like all of my stuff laid out on that table. But I was like sort of parked there for at least a month and a half. Like I was there every day for a few hours working on it. I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, scare anyone, but I definitely left a significant amount of time towards the end of my time at Schwartzman to work on the capstone. And I actually really enjoyed the process. I also think there's like, you know, there's flexibility, right? Like you can figure out, it depends on what you're working on, but like you can work with your advisor to figure out what works best for you and how you want to approach this and what is the right kind of research project for you. And so I picked Professor Andrew Walder from Stanford as my advisor because I had taken his Chinese economy class, but he's a sociologist. And so I felt like his, even though he was teaching Chinese economy, his background is sort of sociology. So he was really helpful and really flexible in terms of directing me and, you know, sort of wasn't very, I'm not trying to take away from the capstone, but he was more interested in my, in my thinking and in my research and in the way that I approached the project than really sort of meeting specific, like, you know, okay, you've hit this rubric mark and now you've hit that rubric mark. And so I think that was super helpful, like picking a capstone advisor who you have who you have a pretty good relationship with, who's also interested in the project that you're interested in and is more interested in, you know, helping you through that than really kind of making sure you hit specific markers to get the grade or whatever. But that was how I approached it. But it's been a while. So those were my memories from that time period.
Thank you both. And Anushka, I know it has been a while since you graduated, but both of you have provided, you know, such a visual on really how you dived in and approached the Capstone Project. I mean, we are getting so many great questions through the Q&A box. A lot of them we've been able to answer via chat. And so for those questions that we weren't able to answer, we'll try to get to as we have only 10 minutes left before the end of the session. And we'll make sure to ask those to you, Dinola, and to you, Anushka. One question I do want to ask, and that was dropped in the Q&A box here, is just the big takeaway. So from your capstone project, from your findings, what was something you did not know beforehand that you realized after your capstone submission or after your defense of your capstone project? Dinola, we'll start with you since it's a little more fresh.
Yes, I'm actually looking at my capstone right now in the corner of my screen. I learned so much about the Chinese feminism movement from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, which I didn't even know about because of the people I interviewed. She was, or she is, an NGO leader, to keep her an anonymity, if I'm saying that correctly, but she's worked sort of in feminism space for years, so she gave me a real education in, like, you know, the people I should research, the books I should read. So it was such a deep dive. I learned a lot about that. But in terms of trends, I think something that, it wasn't shocking, but just there was such a clear sort of, I don't want to say trend, but a clear trend, basically, that those who didn't like to participate in anything around gender equality or roundtables or International Women's Day were also those who did not feel connected at all to the global women's movement. So it's not shocking, but it was just the fact that it was just, you know, so sort of black and white there in the women that I interviewed. But then also something that kind of made me kind of like, oh, but then it's just something that I think most of the literature that I read also agreed with, was so many of these women that I spoke to for this research and just in general conversations while I was in China, you know, doing amazing things, you know, working so hard and had achieved all these things, but then they just would not want to admit, like, I'm a role model or I'm a mentor, but then they would say, I like to help people out, but they don't want to call them mentees. And it's just sometimes the I don't want to say baggage, but yeah, baggage associated with some of these buzzwords like mentorship and leadership. Sometimes people are doing those things, but they don't necessarily kind of take the title. And which also brings me to when people reach out to me because they're applying for Schwartzman and they're like, the leadership essay, I don't want to call myself a leader, and, you know, and all these things. And it's just a case of sometimes in the effort of being too humble, we don't necessarily give ourselves our flowers of what we deserve, really showing, you know, the hard work that we put in and everything. And it's just, I guess, an encouragement, you know, to women out there as well as just everyone, to sometimes try to kind of look at yourself from, not from like that perspective, but from a perspective of, you know, the work that you're doing and just the impact that you're having on others. Because there was actually, this was so unplanned, but one of the people that I interviewed, one of the young girls that I interviewed, said one of the other people I interviewed was her role model, someone that she's been looking up to her whole life. And I didn't say it to her, but then she was saying, I don't think I've really inspired, you know, anyone. And I wanted to say, actually, I've interviewed another person for this thesis who literally said you are like their role model. So it was just really interesting how sometimes we don't see these things about ourselves. So it ended up just really being something about, you know, self-love, self-appreciation, and just a celebration of hard work, especially for a group that's been marginalized across the world for years, you know, women. So yeah, that was my big takeaway. I learned a lot throughout the whole process. And I think a person asked a question about reading my capstone. Anyone who wants to read it, I'll send it to you. I put my email in the chat, so feel free to send me an email. I want more people to read it.
I love that, Danola. And it sounds like too, it wasn't just a takeaway for you, but for those that you were engaging in your research and grabbing their quotes and having them participate in your capstone project. And I think that too is so special. Anushka, what about you? What was the big takeaway from your research? I've seen a few questions in the Q&A as well about your perspective on education policy and how that changed and how you're using that experience moving forward.
Yeah, well, so my big takeaway, this is a little bit more sort of esoteric, but like, so my takeaway was really that there was this sort of movement towards sort of Confucian revivalism in China, right? And Shinya College at Tsinghua University is very much like a lot of the language of starting this institution is rooted in this language of responsibility to people and sort of being well learned in history, culture, arts, and understanding Chinese history, culture, and arts. And so, and I know that, you know, this is maybe not super relatable, but essentially what it seemed like to me was that starting liberal arts, which I consider a sort of more democratic form of education, was being melded into this sort of Confucian revival language to make it more part of sort of Chinese education. And that's kind of how it would be more acceptable in the Chinese education context, if that makes sense. Because I think everything has to, it's like, you want to, in sort of a Confucian sense, you want to create these are all elite colleges, right? They're at China's most prestigious institutions, but you want to create this sort of these group of leaders who are coming out of liberal arts colleges who have been to Tsinghua, who have been to Peking University, but who are also understanding of China's history, culture, and arts, which is missing in the current very STEM or one-track focused education system in China. And so my sense was that the experiment that these liberal arts colleges was to try and create a new kind of Chinese leader, one that understands, because what they've done is they've also married STEM into these liberal arts colleges, is one that maybe have an engineering background, but also is rooted to Chinese history, culture, and tradition. And someone who can basically, if you're leading China in the 21st century, be rooted to China's ancient tradition and China's sort of future goals. That was kind of my big takeaway. I mean, I know that this could, depending on the group that you're talking to, this could spur a lot of debate. And it is a little bit potentially politically contentious, but that was my takeaway. And I will say that in my thesis defense, there was I got a lot of pushback in terms of the pushback really was like, why does India follow the West so much? Why are Indian liberal arts colleges so similar to a liberal arts college in the US? Why aren't they more, why aren't they trying to do what China is doing, which is we've made it more Chinese, we've made it ours, we've rooted it in our own traditions. And so it was a really interesting experience. In terms of what I'm doing now with education, so I worked at VIP Kid as well. So I've tried to marry my interest in education policy and theory with EdTech. And I've also spent the last year actually interning at, while I'm at business school, I'm interning at VC, so I'm interning currently the largest EdTech venture capital firm in the world, Owl Ventures. And they invest in China, India, they invest globally, but I've been helping them a lot with India work, essentially. Yeah, so that's how I've married the two.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And as a follow-up, Anushka, to what you were saying, and for both of you, there's a few other questions coming in from the attendees. How have you made the capstone relevant to your experience now in the workforce? Was that a worthwhile exercise? I'd hope that you would say positively, it's yes, absolutely. But yeah, just reflecting back on that, now that you're working, what was that? What was the value in going through a capstone exercise? Anushka?
I think it is so valuable. I think just the baseline skills of people know this, but analysis, research, reflection, interviewing skills, asking questions, honing your questions. So I'll say that in the last year when I've been working in venture capital, I've been writing theses. I just wrote a thesis on workforce in India. What should workforce investments in India look like? And I use the same skills I use for my, the same fundamental skills I use for my capstone. And the firm that I work for liked it so much they want to publish it as an article. And so I think the skills that you develop in terms of the sort of baseline analytical skills that you're using, you can use for, if you want to go to business, corporate strategy, corporate development, venture capital. I feel like these are all areas. If you want to do academic research, of course, it's going to be super helpful. If you want to do policy, writing policy papers, writing briefs, understanding the context of the policy that you're trying to create deeply, making sure you get the sort of unintended consequences of the policy that you're trying to create, the stakeholders that you're trying to manage. So I would say to anybody that write a thesis at least once in your life, go through the exercise, because the guidance you get, learning how to do it, learning how to ask questions, learning how to research something in anything that you do. If you want to start a company, you need to understand the market that you want to go into. You need to understand what are you trying to solve? And that's essentially a thesis, right? And so highly relevant, super useful. I actually used my thesis and I published an article in India about the comparison between liberal arts in India and China. And I got great feedback on it because this is a recent trend in both India and China. So it's, yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. And Dunola, your experiences now at the UN, how are you able to tie that in together?
Yeah, no, first of all, like everything Anisha said, basically, like I don't want to repeat the same things, but everything she said is so true. As well as that, because I really enjoyed my topic and because I just loved every single interview that I had, just asking these personal questions and just on a kind of on a more selfish note, you know, as a young woman, getting to interview these really accomplished women and just asking them like and learning lessons. Like I took so many even personal notes for myself for inspiration. So on a personal note, I just loved the whole process of speaking with them. And because of course I wanted to sort of transcribe everything they were saying. So I listened back again and it just kept getting, you know, inspired again. As I said, I was reading it again and just being inspired again. So I really enjoyed the topic and I enjoyed the actual experience. But even further than that, as I said earlier, I'm not a big writer. I didn't even write, you know, a dissertation in my undergrad. So to think, though I didn't eventually get it, but just from this capstone, I was this close, got like this PhD scholarship to study women leadership in, I think, Australia or something. And I without even application, just because they just kind of heard about it and then read it. And people who had been in the field for decades thought this was a worthwhile contribution to gender equality. To me, that was like the biggest thing ever. I probably just fudged it in the interview after that. But, you know, the fact that I got to that stage just based on my capstone, when I, in my mind, just kept thinking, I'm not a big writer. I'm just, you know, just seeing how it goes. And so that was a big confidence boost. But now I'm working in the digital inclusion team at the ITU. And we work on a lot of things. Like, for example, in 2 days is International Girls in ICT's Day. If you're interested in coming to any of the events we're doing to celebrate women in tech, email me as well and I'll send you all the links. But basically, we're working directly on trying to get marginalized groups connected to the internet, especially women, especially indigenous people, especially young people, girls, you know, just historically marginalized groups. And this sort of study that I did speaks specifically to that, because every day we're seeing statistics, we're seeing numbers, but because my study I did is so qualitative and it's people's voices, it just reminds you when they say 50% of the world or 25% of the world are not connected to good internet, it's like, it's not just, oh, a statistic, it's like each of these people have a story. Each of them, if you interview them, would be, you know, a whole conversation, and it just humanizes, especially when you're in a field where you're just seeing these numbers every day and it seems like, oh, you know, we're working so hard, but how much of a difference are we really making? When I look at studies like the one that I did, where, you know, I just spoke with 10 women, right, really in depth, and each one had such a unique story, and each one, you know, really had experiences that speaks to this global issue. It just reminds you, well, it reminds me in the work I'm doing in digital inclusion every day, that even if it's just for that one person, they have a story that's important. They should be connected to the internet. They should have the opportunity, whoever they are. And it's just a reminder every day to just keep going for me. And I try to bring that with me to every meeting that I go to every paper that I write, in everything I do, just remembering we are doing this for people, you know, real people. So that is how I think the study that I did and the qualitative kind of work, because I mean, the transcribing and everything, it was a real labor of love. But when you kind of have the finished product at the end, it's like, wow, I wish I could interview every single person in the world because everyone's so interested. But yeah, that's my takeaway.
Thank you both so much. And I think in line with the takeaway, it's the contribution that you both have given. It's not just a one-time capstone project. And this is something I really want to highlight as we wrap up today's session. You know, for both of you, it was the beginning of a conversation. Anushka, you mentioned with All Ventures, you know, and other groups wanting to publish your research, and Dunola, you know, this group out of Australia wanting to highlight your research and take you on as a student of theirs. I think that's really what Schwarzman Scholars is all about. And the Capstone Project, while it is the culmination of your year, it's the beginning of this conversation, and whether it be in education or in women's empowerment. So with that, I will end today's session. I cannot thank you both enough for your insight and perspective and just hearing more about your capstone projects. For those of you who feel inspired by today's session and would like to write a capstone project of your own, we encourage you to apply to Schwarzman Scholars. The application for Chinese applicants is live and the deadline is end of May. And for US global applicants, the application is also live and the deadline being late September. So with that, I thank you all so much for joining today's session. And we look forward to receiving your applications and your capstone projects. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.